Hello, let us analyze another battle where success and failure laid squarely on the decisions taken by the officers at the highest level of command. It is the year 1805, and Napoleon Bonaparte had pushed one of his armies deep into the Austrian Empire and had reached the town of Austerlitz. But beyond that town, he found his way blocked by a large Austro-Russian army. His 66,000 soldiers were faced by 85,000 Allied soldiers, so Napoleon decided to go into the defensive. But he could not stay like that forever. At any time, neutral Prussia could declare war, so he needed a victory fast. So from this moment on, he followed an elaborate deception plan to lure the enemy into battle. As part of that plan, he retreated from Austerlitz and left unprotected the key high ground known as the Pratzen Heights. And in what appeared to be further neglect from his part, by December 1st he only had 5,000 men extending his line to the south along the valley of the Goldbach River. And that small force was a tempting target, because those 5,000 soldiers were protecting the approach to the important road from Brunn to Vienna, and if that road fell, the French army might be cut off. And precisely, sensing that the French were in disarray, the Allied closed in on the evening of December 1st. A strong mixed Austro-Russian force of 30,000 men occupied the Pratzen Heights, while the remaining 55,000 troops of the army extended the line to the north. And the following day, December 2nd, the Allies executed their plan. In the northern sector, several units moved against the French army to pin it down, but the main effort was directed to the southern sector. 3 large columns left the Pratzen Heights to hit the French right, but faulty deployment and lack of previous reconnaissance contributed to a painful slow movement of these troops. And while the northern Allied attack took a really short time to materialize, it was not until 8 a.m. when the first units attacked the town of Telnitz. Then, a bit later, elements of the other columns attacked the castle of Sokolnitz and the town of Sokolnitz. The pressure on the right was enormous, and Telnitz was lost. But 2 days earlier, Napoleon had ordered troops that were far away on Vienna to reinforce him. 4,000 infantrymen and 4,000 cavalrymen had set on a 48-hour march, and now, in the nick of time, leading elements of these troops started arriving and helped to hold the line, and even they retook Telnitz. For now, the Allied assault on the right had been stopped, but the Allied troops started reorganizing themselves to launch a new assault. It was close to 8:45 a.m. and Napoleon was at his headquarters on Suren Hill, observing the development of the situation. And observing the Allied movement, the Emperor confirmed his orders. The left and the right had to hold, and then, with their orders confirmed, the commanders left to join their units, all but one. Napoleon ordered the commander of the center to wait. Up to this moment, 3 large Allied columns had departed from the Pratzen Heights. For a while, a strong 4th column had stood there, but even this started to move downhill. Now the high ground was defended by just 5,000 men. For the next 15 minutes, the Emperor saw the enemy columns still moving away. Then, at 9 a.m., the Emperor ordered the officer to move his command against the high ground on the Pratzen Heights. The officer descended to the flat terrain on the east of the Goldbach, because there, among the mist of the morning, there were 2 infantry divisions already deployed in columns. And now these started to move against the high ground. These divisions had between them 17,000 men. For a few moments, the dense fog covered the advance. But as the massive infantry columns started going up the gentle slope of the Pratzen, the morning sun ripped the mist apart. The Russians on the high ground were stunned to see the dense French infantry columns approaching, but they prepared themselves to fight. A French battalion that had taken the lead was surprised, and a crashing musketry volley from a Russian battalion tore it apart. The Russians had orders to defend that ground, and they held on to their positions, but the French had arrived to the heights with an enormous superiority in numbers, and more battalions were pushed immediately forward. And now, all along the Pratzen Heights, heavy fighting erupted. Napoleon was hitting the Allied center with overwhelming strength, but also the timing of the attack was masterful, because now the Allied left was in a state of total confusion. From this moment on, the commanders of the 4 columns were trapped in the dilemma of obeying their orders of attacking the French right, or to act without orders and counterattack the sudden enemy assault against the high ground on the rear. The Allies eventually reacted, but even then the first Allied counterattack took time to materialize. Meanwhile, the two French divisions used their overwhelming numbers, and after a desperate struggle they defeated the defenders. Now those French troops had time to redeploy to face the inevitable counterattacks. And finally, from the southern sector, 3 counterattacks were launched, each one with more troops than the preceding attack. The first one had 2,000 Russian soldiers, the second 4,000 Russian soldiers, and the last 8,000 Austrians. But all of these counterattacks were defeated, in particular the last one, because by this time the heavy artillery of the French reserves had arrived to the high ground and their fire tore apart the attack. Those counterattacks had been defeated, yet the battle was far from over. On the northern sector, the Tsar finally reacted and ordered his Imperial Guard to retake the high ground. 10,000 Russian troops moved forward and hit the French division on the northern sector, defeating a battalion. But Napoleon also reacted. First, his own guard's heavy cavalry was sent forward, soon to be followed by 2 infantry divisions of his reserves. With cavalry attacks, musketry fire, and artillery fire, the Russian casualties mounted up, and unable to move forward, this counterattack was also crushed. On the southern sector, Allied officers rallied their bloodied regiments and went up the slope one more time, but these units had had enough, and the attack was quickly repulsed. At this time, the greater part of 2 columns had been defeated, and it is relevant to note that during this final push they did not receive any support from the remaining troops of the other columns. Simply, these never received the orders to act. And meanwhile, Napoleon kept making decisions. After the last counterattack was defeated, he decided to move his command post to the Pratzen Heights to have a better view of the situation. And by this time, every Allied counterattack had been defeated, and from his central position he could act. And now he decided to end the battle. His troops on the northern sector received orders to move forward and keep the enemy busy, and he also decided to destroy the enemy trapped on the south. From the Pratzen Heights, one division started moving downhill, and from the west, the French right also started pushing forward. In the mounting confusion of being attacked from several directions, some Allied units held their ground, but others melted away. And now even the commanders of 2 columns fled, soon to be followed by General Buxhowden, commander of the Allied left. That was his only decisive action of the day, and then the whole Allied left disintegrated. Perhaps as many as 20,000 troops from that flank were captured, many thousand more were wounded and killed, and only a few thousand escaped. And to the north, the rest of the Allied army started to retreat. The battle was over. Well, we have reached the end of another video, and let me start by saying this. At the tactical level, both sides were equally matched. Allied and French soldiers were well trained and disciplined. Individual battalions, squadrons and brigades fought as they were trained to. They carried out articulated maneuvers and were able to deploy as needed from columns to battle lines and vice versa. And up until the last minute, Allied units tried to fight against the French. But they were eventually overwhelmed because the Battle of Austerlitz was decided at the operational level. As Napoleon said, genius seizes opportunities. And he also stated that war is composed of nothing but surprises. While a general should adhere to general principles, he should never lose the opportunity to profit from surprises. And of course, Napoleon created a plan to trap his enemies, and during the battle, the enemy totally fell into the trap. And in that regard, the blame of their defeat lays squarely upon the Allied High Command. Tsar Alexander and the Austrian general Weyrother ordered the wide flanking movement and were willing to assume that the French would be unable to react, and for that reason they left their center unprotected and gave no orders to face such an eventuality. On the other hand, we have to praise some of the mid-level officers of the Allied army, because at least some of the commanders on the southern flank decided to counterattack on their own initiative, but their efforts lacked mass and coordination, and they were defeated. Faced with the unexpected, in a matter of minutes the Allied command was left in a state of confusion and was unable to react to the changing situation. The Battle of Austerlitz was a battle of maneuvers. And first Napoleon, with the economy of forces in his right, was able to mass troops in his center, and those troops hit the enemy with speed and surprise. And then he was there, surveying the situation and taking decisions, and because he had a clear picture of the operational level, he was able to manage his forces using his resources where needed. At the appropriate time, he grabbed opportunities and faced threats, and that was his key to victory. Well, I hope that you liked this video, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and also if you like it, please subscribe to my channel. Regards, Victor Aguilar Chan.